at the orders of the highest level of the Saudi royal court. Then gruesome detail that Khashoggi was killed within 2 hours of this moment, and that his body was dismembered by the Saudi team with a bone saw. In what seems to be a deluge of leaks, the Washington Post then divulging that before his disappearance, US intelligence intercepted communications of Saudi officials discussing possibly detaining Jamal Khashoggi. It is unclear whether he was ever warned.
I'm very surprised that one would confirm this by letting the information out. Now, the fact what has been intercepted is also notable because if true, and there now seem to be increasing disparate bits of information that corroborate or substantiate the other pieces of information, it would be a shocking act and a grotesquely glaring one, which therefore, for an intelligence operation, would be really incompetent to lure someone into your own consulate and then murder the person. And while you know that your entrances and exits are all being videoed, is astounding, really.
All this new information seems to be an orchestrated attempt by the Turkish authorities to ramp up the pressure on Saudi Arabia. No Turkish official has officially gone on camera, and no evidence has been presented to back up those allegations. This is a story with major political sensitivities. Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, is seen here waiting for her fiancé outside the consulate. And she has written in the Washington Post, the US paper Khashoggi contributed to, pleading with the US president to clarify what happened to her fiancé and asking the Saudis to release security camera footage. She says she doesn't want to believe that he's been killed. I think we can't stress enough that all of these, horrendous and extremely serious allegations are all unnamed sources, evidence. We deal in evidence, we deal in facts. Nothing of these, really serious allegations can be substantiated at the moment. We heard there that the fiancé is trying, she pleaded with the US administration, even with the Saudis, to release footage to try and figure out what exactly happened. It is hugely political. It is hugely political sensitive. Many people will tell you sometimes that we may never know what exactly happened. But yes, at the moment, no Turkish official has gone on camera to make these allegations, and no evidence of what they are basing the belief on that he was murdered inside that consulate.
There are so many twists and turns in this compelling story, Steph, so many bizarre elements to it. The Saudis telling a US senator, we don't have the tapes because we only reportedly live stream what the cameras feed to us in our control booths. I mean, that's point number one. But point number two, they also need to put together the mini jigsaw surrounding this van with blacked out windows with diplomatic plates, because that left the building reportedly about 2 hours after Jamal Khashoggi went into the building.
Yes, well, on your first point, usually, I'm not an expert, but usually from what I understand from embassies and from their surveillance footage, and this consulate has, various quite visibly outside its perimeter, they do record. But for some reason, yes, the Saudis are saying that they didn't record and that they don't record. And then, of course, there is that investigation in the sense of what exactly happened. Some of it now is being shown in that footage, but it still doesn't explain to us who these people are and what they actually did. Yes, you do see two private planes with two, groups of Saudi nationals arriving at different points in the day. One of them arrived at 3 o'clock in the morning, according to Turkish sources, and the other one much later at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, and only staying here for about an hour and a half before they left again. And then, as you mentioned, the cars. This is another line of inquiry. Multiple black Mercedes vans, diplomatic vehicles, left this area during that time after Khashoggi entered the consulate with some of the, some of the groups that we are talking about, those 15 suspected nationals. There's talk about various boxes that they put into the cars. I can't see it on the footage that we've seen today, certainly, but they're trying to figure out their routes. Where did they go? This is how they're trying to piece it together. Again, all this according to anonymous officials, to sources that we've been speaking to, but the message that is being fed to the media, Peter, is the same. And I think it's a move on behalf of the government here of Ankara to get this out, to pressurize Saudi Arabia. But we haven't had Ankara officially on camera make any of those allegations. And I think that's also giving them some kind of wiggle room, some room for maneuver in what is an incredibly sensitive political story.
Who is it that's doing the investigating here, Steph? Is it just Turkish police, or is it people from, say, the Turkish Home Ministry, because there are reports as well circulating around the region saying that 28 or 29 local hired staff were asked not to come to work on that day because the official reason was there was a big diplomatic gathering happening inside the building. That is just a claim, that is just a report circulating or coming out of one particular Arab outlet.
Yes, and it's something that we've been trying to confirm, and we haven't so far, that they told last minute that the Turkish workers at the consulate were not supposed to come to work that day. Even the journalists here, and there's many of them all waiting outside the consulate, no one has been able to confirm that. So it just goes to show the sort of the rumor mill, the media mill, the rumors, I think, is what we should call them at this point in time, or allegations that are surrounding the story. It is a hugely controversial story. It's an outrageous story. It's very difficult to believe that the way that the Turks are saying, some sources are saying that it happened, actually was carried out. I mean, some people we've been speaking to in the intelligence community would tell you, well, it's a brazen attack if this is the way it was, that he openly entered a Saudi consulate and never to come out again, and then having these allegations from the Turk. Why didn't they, cause a car accident? Well, this is speculation, but it's brazen and it's unprecedented, many people will tell you, in the way that it's been done. But again, we don't know really what has happened to Jamal Khashoggi. We don't know where he is. We don't know if he's alive or dead. We only know what is being leaked from anonymous Turkish sources at the moment. But it is, of course, an incredibly important story. And I think, we need to bring it back to as well. This is a man who has a fiancée, who has a mother, who has a family, who are hearing all these reports, and they're having no answers. And this is why you heard his fiancée also writing in the Washington Post, pleading with the U.S. administration to try and clarify what happened to him.
OK, we'll leave it there for the moment, Stephanie. Thanks very much. Well, as Steph was mentioning in her report there, Mr. Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, has made a public plea to the U.S. Writing in the Washington Post, she says this: "At this time, I am Trump to help shed light on Jamal's disappearance. I also urge Saudi Arabia, especially King Salman and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to show the same level of sensitivity and release CCTV footage from the consulate. Jamal is a..." Well, the US government has demanded a full inquiry into the disappearance. And there are growing calls in Washington for stronger action against Saudi Arabia. Alan Fisher has more.
1 week on since the disappearance of American resident Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul, and the US is still chasing answers.
I know nothing right now. I know what everybody else knows, nothing.
The US State Department insists it is pressuring the Saudis.
We're not going to make any judgments about what had happened to him. The United States is certainly concerned about his whereabouts. Senior officials at the State Department have spoken with Saudi officials through diplomatic channels about the matter. We call on the government of Saudi Arabia to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation.
At a Washington conference discussing current events in Saudi Arabia, concern for the journalist's disappearance bubbled under the surface. One human rights activist says the US must take much stronger action than just expressing concern.
I'd like to see the U.S. demand that the Saudis produce him, and if they can't produce him, produce a detailed explanation, including documentation, CCTV footage, whatever is necessary to demonstrate what did happen to him.
Donald Trump has forged close links with Saudi Arabia. His first foreign trip was to the kingdom. When he entertained Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman at the White House, he boasted of significant arms sales. He wants the Saudis to help rein in Iran's regional ambitions and to sell any White House Middle East peace plan to the Palestinians. But politicians on both sides in Washington say if what the Turks are saying is true, and Khashoggi was murdered in the consulate in Istanbul, then there has to be significant change to US-Saudi relations.
As an elected leader, we stand with you in the media in solidarity to making sure that this does not go unnoticed.
If this is true, if the Saudi regime murdered a journalist critic in their own consulate, there must be accountability and there must be an unequivocal condemnation by the United States.
One Middle East expert says any change has to be well thought out.
But I do think it needs a recalibration, and I do think a very strong, unequivocal message needs to be sent to Riyadh that there are consequences for these kind of actions and that American support is not unconditional.
There's growing pressure on the Saudis to come up with answers about what actually happened in Istanbul. And if they don't, there's a growing number of politicians in the United States who say that must significantly change the relationship between the two countries. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, from the States to the UK, because there are calls for big protests a little later today nearby outside the Saudi embassy in London to highlight the case of Jamal Khashoggi. Lawrence Lee is there for us this hour. Lawrence, how many people are they expecting to turn up?
It's not going to be enormous, but it is going to be focused, organised by journalistic freedoms groups very concerned about the situation in Saudi Arabia, obviously, and the personal situation of Mr. Khashoggi. I'm with Rebecca Vincent from Reporters Without Borders, who's organising this just as people are arriving now. What are your main thoughts about the case as it stands, Rebecca, at the moment?
I mean, it's simply shocking that somebody could go into a diplomatic premises and simply disappear. We're extremely concerned about what's happened to Jamal Khashoggi. Whether any of the theories prove to be true, at the moment we have no evidence. So our question is simply what has happened to him. We're calling for an independent investigation into this and information. Quite frankly, given Saudi Arabia's treatment of journalists, citizen journalists and others who are critical of the regime, we fear the worst. Since last September, there's been at least 15 other journalists who have gone missing, presumably arrested, but not all confirmed. And this is part of a bigger number of, we believe, 25 to 30 journalists and citizen journalists who are behind bars in Saudi Arabia. The country has one of the world's worst records on press freedom, 169th out of 180 countries in our World Press Freedom Index.
You hold protests fairly regularly here outside the Saudi embassy, issues to do with Yemen and other things too. Had you been under the impression that things were getting better in Saudi Arabia with freedoms improving, and do you think this is perhaps suggesting things are not improving the way you'd hoped?
Well, the evidence so far is that things are only getting worse. When Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was welcomed to London several months ago, there were possibly movements that could have been interpreted as positive when it comes to UK-Saudi Arabia bilateral relations, but this sends absolutely the wrong signal about where that's going. I was encouraged, though, by Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt's comments yesterday, indicating that values were important in this relationship. That's a shift from what we've seen from the UK before, and we're hoping that the UK will take a very tough stance on this and other cases of really journalists being persecuted in Saudi Arabia.
Yes, the Foreign Secretary said that this wasn't the sort of behaviour you expect from friends. What's your sense of the priorities of the UK government, human rights or arms sales?
Well, so far it has been arms sales, and I'm hoping that this case and the outrageous nature of this case will actually be a wake-up call to our government here that actually the British public does not want to sell arms to countries like this. We do care about values like democracy, like human rights, like freedom of expression, and we need that to be conveyed in our foreign policy.
Rebecca, thank you very much indeed. We will come back to you, Peter, a little later on with more from the protest here in London. Back to you.
Lawrence, thanks very much. And the latest line on that compelling story as we continue to track it is from the US Vice President Mike Pence. Now, he's clearly talking about this in real time in Washington. He's now saying the US would be open to sending an FBI team to Turkey to help out with the investigation. And this is the crucial point. If the Saudis ask for help with the so many questions, virtually zero answers when it comes to what happened to Jamal Khashoggi. So the top line on that now, coming to us out of Washington, is the US Vice President Mike Pence saying the US would be willing to send an FBI team, presumably FBI forensic investigators, if the Saudis ask for help. The Saudi line, of course, over the past 8 days of this crisis has been, we have nothing to prove. Turkey wants the Saudis to show proof that Mr. Khashoggi not only entered the building, but he also left the building, as Stephanie Decker was saying just to us a little earlier at the top of this half hour of Al Jazeera World News. The inquiry is focusing in on several key areas. What happened to him when he was in there. They need to find out more information about these 15 men that make up, it's been called a kill squad by two reputable US publications, the 15 men who arrived in the same 24-hour time period that Mr. Khashoggi entered the building. They left the building, it's alleged, within 2 hours. They got onto two privately owned aircraft at Istanbul's international airport. Those 2 aircraft then flew to destinations outside of Saudi Arabia, according to the main headlining reports. Pence's comments pretty much dovetailing with what we've been hearing over the past 48 hours, particularly from people like the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo saying we have got to have a clear, transparent, international investigation as to what happened to this man. More on that for you just as soon as we can. Still to come here on Al Jazeera.
Not running for